Looking at my reflection in the mirror, I let out a deep sigh. In the preparation room of the Lenox Hotel, my hands trembled slightly as I smoothed my navy blue cocktail dress. The gentle May sunlight streaming through the window enveloped the entire room in a soft glow. "Mom, this bow tie feels a bit tight." I turned around to see my son Lucas tugging at his collar as he sat on the edge of the bed. Looking remarkably dignified for a 6-year-old in his rented tuxedo. Though usually energetic, he seemed a bit nervous on this special day. Still, his endearing mannerisms remained unchanged. "Here, let me fix that for you." I knelt down and gently adjusted his bow tie. His large brown eyes looked up at me anxiously. I'd been watching over him all morning, worried about his shy nature. Every time his small hand clutched at the hem of my dress, my heart tightened. Usually, he would be absorbed in picture books I brought home from the publishing house or playing energetically in the park. My son's smile was my greatest comfort. Though my job as an editor at a small publishing house isn't easy, the time spent with my son after returning home always washes away my fatigue. "Are Grandma and Grandpa coming today?" At that question, my hands froze for a moment. Robert and Patricia Wilson, my parents. Publicly known as philanthropists, they run the Wilson's Golden Years Foundation as prominent figures in the community. Though they host numerous charity events under the banner of senior citizen support, they haven't once come to see their grandson since the day he was born 7 years ago. No Christmas cards, no birthday presents, nothing at all. For the first few years, we sent them our annual family photos. But there was never any response, and eventually, we stopped that tradition too. The relationship with my parents had grown cold ever since I decided to marry Michael 10 years ago. My husband's salary as a project manager at an IT company isn't low by any means. In fact, our combined income allows us to live quite comfortably. But in my parents' eyes, we were from different social classes. My mother, in particular, had hoped for a marriage connection with a wealthier family. "Jennifer, you've disappointed our expectations." Those words my mother spoke still ring in my ears. From that day on, I became my parents' fake daughter. For parents who valued their social standing above all else, my choice was unforgivable. In contrast, there's my sister Rachel. Working as a nurse while obediently following our parents' wishes, she's cherished as the ideal daughter. She found a marriage partner who met our parents' expectations and became today's bride. I was even surprised to be invited. "It's all right, Lucas. Let's keep our distance from your grandparents, okay?" I whispered softly while gently stroking my son's head. Beside me, my husband Michael, adjusting his tie, cast a worried glance my way. With his mild-mannered personality, he had tried several times to reconcile with my parents. But each time he was coldly rebuffed, and now he can't hide his resignation. "I hope everything goes well, just for today." In the car heading to the venue, I found myself captivated by my son's smile reflected in the rearview mirror. Lucas, with his bright and sincere personality, is my irreplaceable treasure. Even if my parents don't acknowledge us, I silently vowed to protect this small family's happiness no matter what. Outside the car window, the streets of Boston passed by quietly. Born and raised in this city, I had started my own family here too. Memories with my parents certainly remained scattered throughout this city, but now wasn't the time to dwell on them. Upon arriving at the venue, a large number of guests had already gathered. Under the luxurious crystal chandelier, white damask tablecloths spread elegantly. White roses and calla lilies added refinement to the entire venue. And at the entrance to the venue, our eyes met with my parents. My mother in her Chanel suit and my father in his Armani, their flashy jewelry made their demeanor appear even more pretentious. Wrapped in luxury brands, they were the very picture of success. A cold gaze. A moment of silence. My parents merely glanced at us before quickly looking away. At that gesture, I felt Lucas's hand tremble slightly in mine. "This way, please." The seats we were shown to by the venue staff were quite far from the main table. Holding Lucas's small hand tightly, we quietly took our seats. I felt anxiety slowly constricting my heart about how this wedding would unfold. I felt a slight relief at the place cards set on the table. At least we were far from my parents. At this distance, I could protect my son. Just as I thought this, I felt the atmosphere in the venue freeze for a moment. My sister Rachel had appeared in her pure white wedding dress. Rachel shone as beautifully as a movie heroine. The ceremony was conducted solemnly, and then the reception began. The sound of champagne corks popping echoed, and the golden bubbles of Veuve Clicquot were poured into crystal glasses. The venue, decorated with white roses and calla lilies, exuded an elegance unique to the upper class. The chandelier light elegantly illuminated the silver and tableware arranged on the tables. In this fairy tale-like splendor, I held my son's hand tightly. "Mom, that white cake is really huge, isn't it?" Lucas whispered to me. Despite his tense expression, childlike curiosity peeked through. The wedding cake was 6 tiers high, decorated with delicate sugar craft. Its pure white form caught the eye clearly even from our seats at the edge. Today's menu features filet mignon and lobster thermidor. As the serving staff's voice quietly echoed, I lowered my eyes to my plate. Despite the aroma of luxurious food wafting through the air, my stomach was too tight with anxiety to swallow even a single bite. And now, a word from the bride's parents. At the MC's announcement, the venue fell silent. As I watched my parents stand up, I instinctively straightened my back. Mother was dressed in a top-of-the-line Chanel suit with a large diamond necklace at her throat. Her profile was as perfect as a mannequin displayed in a luxury boutique window. Father too was dressed in Armani's latest suit. Every movement seemed to proclaim their success. "Thank you all for gathering here today despite your busy schedules." Father's voice resonated through the venue via the microphone. His expression showed his usual dignified face as a philanthropist. The perfect smile of the representative of the Wilson's Golden Years Foundation. The guests in attendance directed respectful gazes toward him. "And today, we have prepared a special surprise for everyone." Mother's voice followed. At that moment, my heart leaped. I sensed something ominous behind my parents' smiles. It was the same cruel light I had seen when they condemned my marriage 10 years ago. "Lucas Thompson, would you come forward please?" At the sudden call, my son looked up at me anxiously. The venue spotlight illuminated our table. The surrounding guests turned curious eyes toward us. "It's okay." Even as I said this, my voice was trembling. Michael reached out worriedly, but Lucas had already stood up. The bow tie I had fixed this morning in the preparation room was now slightly crooked. "Come here, please." A staff member approached with a small silver tray. It was clearly child-sized. Realizing it had been prepared in advance, anger welled up in my chest. Not knowing what was about to happen, Lucas timidly stepped forward. Watching my son's small back as he walked between the pure white tablecloths, he looked strangely vulnerable. The spotlight mercilessly poured down on his small frame in the tuxedo. The atmosphere in the venue changed. Small whispers began circulating among the guests. Lucas, usually so energetic, now walked forward as if shrinking into himself. "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention please." Father's voice echoed again. While wearing a broad smile, his eyes glinted coldly. After adjusting the collar of his suit where an expensive fountain pen peeked from the breast pocket, he gripped the microphone again. "Let me introduce today's special waiter, our defective grandson." The venue fell silent. I thought my heart had stopped. The chandelier light suddenly felt cold. "And his mother, our fake daughter. Worth less than her sister." Mother's voice delivered the final blow. Her figure, adorned with flashy jewelry, radiated an elegance that was incongruous with the cruelty of her words. At that moment, inappropriate laughter leaked from somewhere in the venue. It gradually spread until the entire venue was filled with improper laughter. The guests wrapped in luxury brands were watching this cruel scene as if it were some sophisticated entertainment. My 6-year-old son stood there, head bowed, holding the small silver tray in both hands. I could see his shoulders trembling slightly. The formal wear we had prepared together that morning now seemed to wrap around his small body like heavy armor. "Lucas." I stood up reflexively. Michael gently grabbed my arm as I tried to rush to my son. His eyes told me to stay calm. But how could I stay calm? My beloved son was being made a laughingstock. The laughter in the venue continued to swirl like a whirlpool. While tilting their champagne glasses, the guests seemed to be enjoying our family's humiliation as if it were quality entertainment. Lucas's shoulders began to tremble even more. I could see his small hands desperately supporting the silver tray. He looked like a small tree trying desperately to hold its ground in a storm. That's when it happened. In a corner of the venue, a woman slowly stood up. Margaret Thompson, my mother-in-law. She maintained her usual composure. In a simple yet elegant navy blue dress, she stood with her back perfectly straight. Her expression was the very picture of calm. However, her eyes held a sharp light I had never seen before. "May I have a moment of your time, please?" Margaret's voice was surprisingly gentle. The inappropriate laughter that had filled the venue disappeared as if by magic. Under the chandelier light, her figure radiated a strange dignity. "I apologize, but I would like to say a few words." Her voice carried the quiet strength characteristic of a woman who had exposed numerous frauds as a former financial investigator. My mother-in-law strode forward in her navy blue dress and gave some instructions to the staff. Her attire, avoiding gaudy decorations, contrasted sharply with my parents' flashy appearance. "Could you please prepare the screen?" At those words, my parents' expressions stiffened for a moment. Mother's demeanor changed particularly noticeably. The large diamond necklace at her throat cast an unnatural gleam, and her hands could be seen trembling slightly. The mechanical sound of the screen descending echoed through the silent venue. Lucas still stood there, holding the small silver tray. Michael quickly stood up and drew our son close. I could feel his small back still trembling. Today, I would like to discuss the Wilson's Golden Years Foundation. Margaret's voice echoed through the venue again. On the screen, the logo of my parents' charitable organization was displayed prominently. The luxurious golden design. The elegant curved text and silhouettes of young and old people together. However, its gleam now seemed to carry an ominous shadow. First, let me tell you about my mother. The projector light illuminated Margaret's profile. Her figure radiated a dignity like that of the goddess of justice. My mother, Eleanor Thompson, was one of this foundation's first victims. A small stir went through the venue. The screen displayed a photo of a smiling elderly woman. Michael's grandmother, my grandmother-in-law. The photo showing her warm smile was probably taken before she fell victim. 5 years ago, my mother donated her entire fortune to this organization. Her life savings of about $800,000. And immediately after that, she was placed in a facility where family visits were restricted. Margaret continued in a matter-of-fact tone. However, the anger hidden in the depths of her voice gradually became palpable. In her hands, she held a thick file. Initially, we tried to respect my mother's wishes. However, we noticed something was wrong with her. And then we learned about others who had suffered similar harm. The screen displayed financial documents one after another. Charts showing complex money flows. Unusual transfers of funds. Everything had been analyzed from a professional perspective. Red arrows clearly indicated problematic transactions. Over these 5 years, I've conducted a thorough investigation using my experience as a former financial investigator. And one shocking fact after another came to light. The evidence was overwhelming. It showed how funds collected under the pretext of donations flowed through multiple accounts and ultimately into my parents' personal accounts. Records of luxury car purchases, overseas trips, extravagant shopping, everything had been funded from the donations. This is video testimony from one of the victims. The screen showed an elderly person. A man who had once been a successful businessman spoke in a trembling voice about his experience. How he was made to donate his entire fortune and then essentially imprisoned in a facility. The venue listened in breathless silence to his testimony. And these are the bank transaction records. Margaret presented one piece of decisive evidence after another. Transaction histories, signed documents, records showing treatment at the facilities. Everything had been meticulously recorded and organized. My parents' expressions changed visibly. Large drops of sweat appeared on my father's forehead, and my mother's fingertips trembled uncontrollably. Their figures wrapped in luxury brands now looked pitifully small. The Chanel suit and Armani attire were no longer dignified clothing, but mere ostentation. The total estimated damages exceed $5 million. The number of confirmed victims is at least 15. Most of them lost all their retirement funds. Margaret's calm voice froze the venue. The faces of the guests who had been laughing at my parents' cruel joke earlier had now turned pale. And many of the victims are captured in photographs like these. The screen displayed photos of smiling elderly people one after another. Some showed them with my parents. These photos, taken ostensibly as records of charitable activities, now served as undeniable evidence against my parents. The police have already been notified. Almost simultaneously with those words, uniformed police officers appeared at the venue entrance. My parents stood frozen in place. The microphone fell from my father's hand, making a dull sound on the carpet. The venue instantly became chaotic. Cries of surprise rose from among the guests, and the sound of champagne glasses being dropped echoed. Golden liquid stained the pure white tablecloths. The expressions of those who had been indulging in inappropriate laughter moments ago were now filled with fear and confusion. And one more thing. Margaret added this final point. Her voice carried an emotion unlike any before. Those who insult their grandson and hurt their family have no right to protect the elderly. At that moment, I felt tears involuntarily spill from my eyes. In Michael's arms, Lucas finally raised his face. The fear was no longer present in his small eyes. Instead, they held a light of relief. The police officers quietly approached. A heavy tension filled the wedding venue's elegant space. Mr. Robert Wilson, Mrs. Patricia Wilson, would you cooperate with our voluntary questioning? The police officer's voice was extremely polite. However, there was intensity in his gaze. It was evident that the evidence displayed on the screen had already been analyzed in detail by the police. This must be some mistake. Father's voice trembled. Cold sweat could be seen seeping through his Armani suit. We were conducting legitimate charitable activities. Mother's words were cut off by Margaret's calm voice. Just the Eleanor Thompson case alone constitutes charges of fraud and unlawful confinement. The same applies to the other victims. New materials were displayed on the screen. Charts showing total damages, lists of victims, and detailed methods of the crimes. Everything had been meticulously recorded. First, they identified wealthy elderly people and encouraged them to participate in charitable activities. The detective began explaining. His voice echoed throughout the venue. Next, they played on fears about retirement and encouraged full donation to the foundation. After the donation, victims were placed in facilities and their contact with the outside world was restricted. A diagram of the criminal process was displayed largely on the screen. It looked like a perfectly calculated business plan. Why did you do such things? Rachel's trembling voice could be heard. My sister's face, wrapped in her pure white wedding dress, had turned pale. She too had just learned the true nature of our parents. Appearances. Father suddenly muttered. His voice no longer held any dignity or arrogance. Social status, fame, the envy of others. Everything was for the sake of appearances. The confession began. The darkness in my parents' hearts gradually came to light. We wanted to maintain the image of a perfect family. We wanted to be seen as more successful than anyone else. For that, Mother's makeup began to streak with tears. The diamond necklace at her Chanel suit collar gleamed emptily. For the sake of our pretend lifestyle, how many people have we hurt? At Father's words, the entire venue fell silent. Small sighs escaped from among the guests wrapped in luxury brands. Many of them were people who had envied my parents' luxurious lifestyle. Jennifer, Michael, and Lucas. Mother turned toward our family. For the first time, genuine regret appeared in her eyes. I'm truly sorry for hurting and insulting you. At those words, Lucas trembled slightly. In Michael's arms, our son remained silent, head bowed. Rachel staggered toward me. I didn't know anything. But that's no excuse. Large tears spilled from my sister's eyes. I went along with our parents and participated in hurting your family. I'm so very sorry. At that moment, I felt something melting in my heart. 10 years' worth of hatred and anger gradually softened in the face of my sister's sincere apology. Auntie. Suddenly, Lucas called out in a small voice. Rachel looked at her nephew with tear-filled eyes. I'm sorry I ruined your wedding. At those innocent words, Rachel let out a sob. No, Lucas. I'm the one who should be sorry. My sister knelt down to meet her nephew's eyes. Her pure white dress spread wide on the floor. From now on, I hope we can be a real family. At those words, Lucas gave a small nod. For the first time, a small smile appeared on his lips. However, this warm moment was brief. The police officers quietly approached my parents. Mr. Robert Wilson, Mrs. Patricia Wilson, you are under arrest on suspicion of fraud and unlawful confinement. The sound of handcuffs echoed coldly under the chandelier light. The guests watched in tense silence as my parents were arrested in the luxurious wedding venue. But in my heart, a strange sense of relief spread. It was over. My parents' false life, their treatment of our family, everything was over. Margaret quietly walked to our side. I'm sorry this turned into such a dramatic wedding. But this was our last chance to reveal the truth. I gave a small nod at her words. 3 months later, one morning, I was spreading out the Boston Herald at the breakfast table. The front page prominently reported the results of my parents' trial from the previous day. The photo showed my parents, once radiant as philanthropists, now as defendants. Without their luxury brand attire, the two looked very small in their prison uniforms. Wilson couple sentenced to prison for elder fraud. Deception behind the perfect family, full details of organized crime disguised as charity. The article detailed the case meticulously. Their obsession with maintaining upper-class appearances, their fixation on the illusion of a perfect family, and their establishment of social status through charitable work. The truth hidden beneath the glamorous exterior was revealed in full. The sentence was 15 years in prison. Additionally, a restitution order of $5 million was issued. Their social credibility completely collapsed, and everything my parents had built over the years crumbled like a castle made of sand. According to the article, compensation for the victims would come from selling all of my parents' assets. The Chanel suits, Armani clothing, flashy jewelry, everything would be liquidated to repay the victims. Mom, Rachel's coming today, right? Facing his breakfast pancakes, Lucas asked in a bright voice. His previous shyness had faded, and he had fully regained his lovable nature as a nephew. That day at the wedding venue when he stood trembling with the small silver tray seemed like a distant memory. Even the memory of being humiliated as a special waiter seemed to be healing. Yes, she wants to discuss preparations for the new wedding. My sister and her fiancé, with his deep understanding, were planning a smaller wedding. After that day's ceremony was interrupted by the police intervention, Rachel had serious discussions with her fiancé. This time, instead of superficial grandeur, it would be a warm ceremony celebrating genuine family bonds. I heard they had chosen a cozy church rather than a luxury hotel for the venue. During the investigation, my parents' twisted psychology became clear. Their absolute desire to control family, particularly directed at me. Their vindictiveness toward a daughter who wouldn't follow their wishes, and their differentiation between the ideal daughter and the failed daughter. It was revealed that the incident at the wedding had been meticulously planned as a final punishment for me. According to the trial records, Mother testified during questioning, "We wanted to maintain the image of a perfect family. But Jennifer betrayed our expectations. So we thought we'd use her precious son for one final lesson." When I read that confession, I felt something quietly release within me. At the root of my parents' actions lay their attachment to a luxurious lifestyle, their obsession with maintaining the appearance of success, and a critical lack of empathy for others. Their tendency to treat family as possessions was clearly reflected in their attitude toward us children. But now, those dark shadows of the past are gradually fading. Margaret's courageous action not only restored the victims' lives but also brought our family a new beginning. My mother-in-law's calm judgment and decisive action saved many people's lives. "Hey, Mom." While carefully pouring maple syrup on his pancakes, Lucas looked up at me with a thoughtful expression. "Will Grandpa and Grandma ever get out?" At that innocent question, I momentarily struggled for words. But this too was part of the reality we needed to face. Well, 15 years is a long time, but that gives us time to think too. I'm sure Grandpa and Grandma are realizing their mistakes." I answered while gently stroking my son's head. Indeed, in their final court appearance, genuine regret seemed visible on my parents' faces. Mother, in particular, appeared to be repeating unspoken words several times while looking at Lucas and me. The doorbell rang, announcing Rachel's arrival. There was no more awkwardness or embarrassment like before. My sister now stood before us as her true self. She too had been liberated from our parents' control and had regained her authenticity. "Good morning, sis," Lucas. That smile held no more pretense. The aroma of Margaret's homemade apple pie wafted across the table. My mother-in-law had started baking this pie and bringing it over every weekend. It had become more than just a dessert, it was a symbol of our bond. "Auntie, will you show me the wedding photos today?" Lucas happily ran to my sister. Rachel embraced her nephew tenderly while taking out the album from her new wedding last weekend. The ceremony was held in a small church, attended only by relatives and close friends. There were no luxurious chandeliers or expensive decorations. Instead, warm sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, gently enveloping the church. Rachel chose a modest ivory dress rather than pure white. Lucas proudly participated as the ring bearer this time. And I, as my sister's attendant, could genuinely offer words of blessing. "Look, here's Lucas carrying the rings." The photo in the album shows Lucas walking proudly, carrying a small cushion with the rings. Gone was the sad expression from that day. His image tenderly holding the precious rings in both hands, rather than a silver tray, was truly radiant. Margaret looks lovely in this photo too. My mother-in-law attended the ceremony in her modest navy blue dress. Her presence had become a saving light for our family. In her gentle smile in the photograph, I saw sure hope for our new life. This is our new family form. Though lacking superficial glamour, there are genuine bonds connected by real affection here. The life adorned with luxury brands has ended, replaced by days filled with heartfelt warmth. Outside the window, the fresh May breeze rustled through the trees. The wounds in our hearts are surely healing. And surely, our future life will be filled with new hope. Even if there's sometimes pain, we'll keep moving forward. That's our new resolve, having overcome this ordeal.